with that, I'll turn it over to not Millie. That's me. Millie's running late. She might jump in at the end here, but I'm gonna start us off with our panel today. This is room A, hashtag A4 if you want to participate over Twitter. And this session is titled It Me. Originally seen as a disembodying force, the web offers opportunities for new kinds of embodiment and identity construction that redraw traditional boundaries while inventing different ones. So today we're going to have 4 fantastic presentations that we're all very excited about. Pier Giorgio, you want to go first? Yeah? Yeah, all right.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And okay, that's mine. Just 1 second. Okay. I'm co-presenting with Paola Parmigiani. My colleague shouldn't make to come, but she is very pleased to join in theorizing the web on the internet. I think she is following on the live stream. Okay, the point is celebrity athlete and brands and their relationship with activism, political activism, and in special the case of Colin Kaepernick, that probably you know better than us European, and its relationship with Black Lives Matter. Well, let's start with the 3 elements we decided to pick and present from Jean Baudrillard about the hyper-real society and the fact that all the communication, especially the digital mediated communication, basically brings in an hyper-real world in his world, and in his world, even if it talks little about the internet, and is that the sacred, what Durkheim defined as secret, has been destroyed by the modern Western culture, and especially by the modern Western culture, communication culture, we may say. Second point is that this brings in a fading of the original, or better, the original tend to disappear, and the sign becomes the meaning, you know? So, third point is pure reality is replaced by what he defined as hyper-real or hyper-reality, where the boundary between real and imaginary are eroded more and more. Okay. Second point is from his approach about the symbolic exchange and the death, and is the point he made is about the simulacrum. Okay, basically he says simulacrum is never that which concern the truth, but is the truth itself, which conceal that there is none. The simulacrum is true. Okay, this just to put the framework about all the discussion, especially recent discussion about post-truth era. Okay, we think that the Jean Baudrillard approach is pretty interesting because he forecasts the post-truth era, and then this is our theoretical hypothesis. And during yesterday presentation and keynote, I noticed that the word prosumer, even if it's not so fancy or so appreciated within the sociological debate, but he was hovering all around every presentation and every keynote. I mean, the fact that production and consumption have not to be taken as a separate concept anymore, but that they are part of the same continuum, and we can bring in the George Ritter approach about the fact that prosumer basically is a part of the same logic union. So we all produce and consume together whenever we take any action about what we do in the atom domain or in the bit domain, if we want to keep this distinction still alive. Point is that being prosumer by some instance brings in the so-called empowerment of the prosumer that is pretty discussed on the literature, but also the fact that there is a kind of exploitment of the free labor prosumer made on the digital space, and we can say also on the physical space. That leads to a contradiction. Prosumer by a side are subject enabled by the power of making, fixing, sharing, testing, and blah blah, and by the other side are also objectified in the relationship of their work, their activity, and the brand. Okay, let's think about Uber driver, or let's think about Airbnb and other example of what can be defined as prosumer capitalism and objectification of the free labor of the prosumer. Our thought goes into the direction of the fact that the prosumer debate has to be focused upon the notion of walled garden, so closed platform that has full control upon application, content, media, and prohibits the free access to the content. And let's bring like 3 examples of what a walled garden is or maybe, and we can have like the Apple environment or some operating system environment. Microsoft, same as well, can be considered as a closed platform or a walled garden. Okay, and the Facebook too is kind of walled garden. Or professional league, NFL, we choose NFL because of the case history about Colin Kaepernick. Is pretty is first of all, it's a huge cultural industry. Okay, like every sport performance, every sport league can be considered as a cultural industry and as a walled garden, where every aspect of the spectacularization of the message delivered is somehow controlled by the brand. You know, every causes NFL promote is controlled by NFL, and like athlete and other actor cannot have any freedom of choice about which cause support or not support. Think about the breast cancer awareness or the military support, and everything is controlled by the brand. Every aspect of the play, every communication, every content delivered to mainstream media is controlled first of all by the brand as a walled garden. And you know, and so problem is there is an issue about freedom of expression within the walled garden. Same thing can be said in the Apple environment or in the Facebook environment. Like, we perceive we are free of express ourselves within this context, but how can we really say we are free of express ourselves, and how are we slave or entrapped within the platform? Okay, then of course the thing of the digital dualism, and what Nathan Jungerson also says about the merging of the coexistence of the atom and bit together. Okay, what happened on the so-called atom domain as repercussion on the bit domain and vice versa. Let's come to the case history. Okay, thank you very much. Let's come to the case history presented. And this is the silent protest by Colin Kaepernick. The protest began in August 26, 2016. The athlete sat during the national anthem. Okay, big debate on the media, traditional media, social media, and let's make a step backward and analyze what can be defined as the character metamorphosis. On the left side, we have the classical billboard of an athlete. Okay, we can say the classical stereotype of an athlete, showing muscles, showing fashion, clothes, tattoo and everything and blah blah, like the GQ magazine. And by the opposite side, the new version of the athlete, politically involved, like sitting and showing the knee protest on the Time magazine. Other evolution we can see is from 2014 to today, the evolution of the hairstyle of the athlete, expressing through symbolism his commitment to a social cause. But together with the evolution on the hairstyle, on the look of the athlete, we have the loyalty to brands, like commercial brand, like Nike or Beats earplugs, you know. So there is this double characteristic of being exploited and empowered together, even in the evolution and the visual evolution of the style and the outfit of the athlete. Other elements are the symbol involved into the evolution of the look and the communication of the protest, like the Afro Eye style, the Malcolm X t-shirt, where there is printed the meeting between Malcolm X and Fidel Castro in Harlem at the Apollo Theater, and what else? The police pig socks. All these are signs, little signs, small sign of seeking a space within the walled garden, a space of expression, little marginal space of expression. And then, of course, the technique protest, that is an inversion of the classical semantic of the American football subculture, because, I mean, taking a knee is often considered in the American culture, an American football subculture, like a sign of respect that has been disrupted by the media and by all the debate on the press and the classical media and the social media as a form of disrespect for the national anthem. Of course, the cause supported by the athlete is Black Lives Matter. Thank you very much. And the message has spread all around the nation, going viral. From high school and other athletes following him, and also an episode of South Park and other sport discipline has been influenced by the Kaepernick protests. Okay, and this has also an effect on the U.S. election, like basically two different persons delivering the same message and being perceived in a completely different way. Going fast, the social media scene and the debate and the polarization debate upon the protest, like people burning the jersey and or claiming against and making rant against the athlete. But what is peculiar is that during the protest time, the jersey of the athlete has been the most sold jersey on the market, So again, this double relationship between empowerment and exploitment, objectification or reification, if we wish to use the Marxian term, and the empowerment permitted by seeking space of freedom within the walled garden. The debate take its peaks when there was the ending of the G20, when even the former president of US, Barack Obama, take a statement about the solidarity of his personal solidarity and perceivedness of authenticity of the message delivered by the athlete. Wrapping things up very quickly, okay? So, 4 points about the presentation and the theoretical analysis of the technique process silent protest, okay? The post-truth era and information distortion as propaganda. Okay, I'm just finishing up. The freedom within the walled garden are really possible form of freedom of expression, or is just a simulacra, like Baudrillard already says. The athlete's social role, and so the relationship between his professional activity and his social figure and social role, and then the relationship between celebrity and activism. Are those always genuine or instrumental? Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for getting long.
Thank you. So now we're going to have, who's next? Mitra, is that? Yeah? Yeah. Come on up.
Thank you. Yeah, can you hear me, guys? Yeah, thank you for being here. That was really inspiring, Per Giorgio. There's a lot of convergences. I'm not sure now, given the little time I have, how much I can actually draw over your presentation, especially in relation to hyperrealism and this type of subjectivity that is emerging in this context. But I would like to give you an overview actually of my research, which has been dealing with processes of gaze disembodiment. And I also want to say this research is going to sound a little bit abstract, and I'm going to bring some visual examples to sort of ground it visually. But in reality is really coming from a fieldwork experience that I've been doing in the last years in context of crisis, and especially in the Arab Springs, where I've been seeing a number of situations and protesters using a specific type of image, which we can define as sort of an embodied image realized through technologies like mobile phones, that were eventually uploaded online and became an instrument for protesters on the ground to spread the info, spread information about police and military violence. So given that concept and given that specific situation I was embedded in, I started being interested in processes of gaze disembodiment. I started to be interested in seeing how new technologies of vision are actually starting to disembody the gaze of the subject, that are actually using them. And I was especially interested indeed in understanding how these processes of gaze disembodiment, we're going to talk about that more specifically, are becoming and were becoming and are becoming and are still right now, and they're going to be one of the most interesting political aesthetic battlefields of our time. One of the interesting things I noticed from the beginning by looking at the variety of these technologies of vision, that all of them somehow were adopting POV, which is cinematic technique, which I guess you guys are familiar with, this sort of like embodied simulation where the camera is acting in a space as if the actor is present and is giving to the audience the feeling of being embodied in the image, of being the actor himself, which is indeed instead actually lacking at all. And all of these technologies were really, if you think about mobile phone cameras, you think about Google technologies of vision that I like to refer to as the Google gaze circuits. That's very important. We're gonna go back to this. And virtual reality technologies and machine vision technologies were all dealing with POV. They were all trying to adopt it, transform it, reinvent it, and by doing that, changing its aesthetic status on one side and its symbolic status on the other side. So aesthetically, again, we have this pattern of disembodiment, and politically, we have POV becoming charged with political meaning. And again, I bring you back to the example of the Arab Spring. Now, yeah, I want to bring then some little images. I mean, this maybe doesn't really require too many explanation. Well, this was a quick one. It's a meme, but what's interesting in this meme is we have a protester busy in trying to destroy a CCTV camera, which is definitely one of the symptoms of this process of gaze disembodiment. A CCTV camera as a sort of static machinic gaze, and a protester which is actually being shot by, if you notice, by a mobile, what it looks like a mobile POV embodied camera. So here already you have this sort of short circuiting between embodied and disembodied image, and you have already the political tension between the two. Another even clearer example, this I would like to show you in its entirety, just 40 seconds, from Syria, just to give you, and that's an history classroom, and the teacher is talking to a student. Do we have audio? Oh, yeah. So just very briefly.
فعم يتوثق التاريخ بالفيديو، كانوا يوثقوا التاريخ على الورق، صح؟ هلا خلينا نوثق تاريخنا بكره إذا الله كتب لنا عمر، يعني وبكره انتم كبرتوا بتحكوا لاولاد اولادكم تقولوا لهم والله هيك كان يصير معنا وكنا نكون بالمدرسه والى اخره.
So here, yeah, not even literal, not even symbolic or metaphorical, literally an history class teacher like talking to the students saying we can use these mobile technologies and an embodied type of image as a way to make history. Now, as I was saying, there is a trend indeed in these technologies of vision of disembodying the gaze of the subject, and this trend is really graspable and easily understandable if you think, for example, about the selfie stick, like this sort of object in between the body of the subject and the image making device, which is the first step towards disembodiment. From these little movement, we can really identify and sort of like make a cartography of the processes of POV disembodiment by considering the degree of disembodiment. So from a POV embodied image, we can have definitely a transition through the selfie stick to a FPV regime of visibility. FPV stands for first person view and is the type of regime of visibility which is involving the presence of a subject controlling an image making device from a faraway distance wirelessly. And that's, for example, the case of drone technologies, both in military context and in more ludic ones, and eventually CCTV that I was mentioning at the beginning. So you see, we can organize process of gaze disembodiment according to this sort of like the three regime of visibility. This is a little bit simplified, of course, and there's something happening before the POV and something happening after the CCTV, which is robotic and machine vision. I don't gonna have the time to talk about this today. I also wanted to again to remind you that it seems possible, and that's actually what I want to leave you maybe at least as an element of reflection or reflection. There is a possibility to trace a pattern connecting processes of POV embodiment to processes of resistance against controlled politics, and the example of the Arab Springs and the use of a certain type of image in that context is symptomatic of that. At the same time, there is the possibility of understanding processes of gaze disembodiment as instrumental to control politics. And the example of the Google Gaze circuit, so the ensemble of Google technologies of vision like Google Glass, Google 360, Google Maps, and Google Car are all really screaming in that direction, because it seems that in that specific context, and I'm gonna show you in a second in this sort of like image, it seems that in that context, yeah, thank you. In that context, POV disembodiment become the aesthetic fabric without which it wouldn't be possible for Google algorithms to track disembodying and tracking and datifying and eventually extracting values from the subjectivities that are experiencing these processes. Here you have Nasser Bitar. That's kind of funny. You have Nasser Bitar, citizen of Ontario, Canada, taking a selfie of himself while a Google car is passing through exactly at the same time he's snapping a selfie. So all of this is sort of searchable online, and you can access it through Google Maps from a Google satellite CCTV-like point of view, and indeed like going down surfing into the ground and watching this sort of image from the FPV first-person view regime of visibility perspective generated by the car. And indeed you can go back to the sort of semi-embodied selfie practice of Nasser. This is a sort of similar circuit, similar to the one we saw at the beginning with the protester destroying the CCTV cam. And the process of disembodiment are really happening to the point that even CCTV-like imagery in Google Maps is getting contaminated with 3D modeling. So we are in a context where even satellite images were somehow relating to a reality are completely hyper-realized, if you want, using Pier Giorgio term, and become 3D models. Now, what's happening is unfortunately things are not that easy. I mean, it's true, there is a pattern, and there is a pattern connecting embodiment to form of resistance to control politics, and there is a pattern connecting disembodiment to control politics and datification and trackability. At the same time, it's also the opposite is true. I mean, we can think of embodiment as an instrument for promoting very conservative, aesthetically speaking, society. For example, the use of POV embodied image in the context of phallocentric, androcentric pornography. That's a case in which embodiment doesn't stand for political resistance, rather the opposite. At the same time, and that's where things are mainly interesting for me, is given the fact that these processes of abstraction, these processes of disembodiment concerning, especially these days, virtual reality and machine vision, given that these processes are happening, how we can act this process, how we can inject into these processes of disembodiment political agencies, I mean, and then convert them as into platform for political experimentation. And the best example that I found in that direction is an example referring to something that happened in Madrid in 2011. This is an hologram protest these are protesters that have been forbidden to take into the streets in front of the government building, and that decide to manufacture an hologram version of themselves and indeed squatting the street in front of the government in this manner. Here again, then you have the opposite of what I was saying almost. You have like the necessity of this embodiment as the only way actually to engage and to continually exercise a right to protest. Yeah, I'm pretty much done. I mean, what's happening to the subjectivities that are involved in this process, and back to the theme of the panel, how these processes of disembodiment relate to processes of that are, at least I call processes of internet embodiment, especially in relation to this type of subjectivities also Pier Giorgio was referring to, that I also define as res Googleable to emphasize its sort of internet-based, cloud-based like strange solidity, and then the internet embodiment is not something that happens without friction. I mean, all the ways people are engaging with their body online, the fire challenge, people setting themselves on fire, or the chili general challenge, people blowing their lips up and putting pictures on Instagram, and well, yeah, that's my last thing. And then are not smooth at all. These processes are not smooth, and what's interesting is indeed try to think from an Arendt space of appearance, and I'm closing with this, the fact that the offline space of appearance that Hannah Arendt was thinking about is totally getting over by CCTV technologies, and in that sense, at the same time, an internet space of appearance is sort of opening, and how we can transform this space of appearance from a space, the online one, from a space where datification is happening, into a space for political experimentation. And the things can go also a little bit weird, like in this case. I mean, but in any case, these are all examples that are like screaming about what's happening to the body online in relation to the disembodiment of the gaze. And yeah, I'm gonna leave you with this strange thing. I mean, yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So next we have Faye Xavier with digital dualism and online sex work.
Do you want to save your slide timings? Sorry, I didn't. Cool. Do-do-do. Oh no, I lost the mouse. I love technology.
Oh, it's on the other.
Fun. Come back to me. I got in trouble at work the other day for singing in class. Help. Oh. Wait, can you help me in something? I can't really find the thing. And I accidentally added a new slide. Oh, there it is.
There we go. Hey, we're back. And you want the slide gun?
Yeah. Cool.
Start there.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. Okay. Hello, internet in real life. I'm Faye Chevalier, Twitter user Bratcore, and this is my presentation, Digital Dualism and Online Sex Work. So I first and foremost wish to establish that I'm going to be approaching this talk as an examination of ideology and semiotics within online sex work, particularly camming as a practice and an internet culture. I intend to focus on the symbolic and phenomenological effects of and within the practice and performances involved in online sex work, with a specific focus on how Nathan Jurgensen's concept of digital dualism is utilized by successful cammers in order to continue to attract customers and improve their performances. I argue that the selling point of camming, the type of interaction/environment that makes camming a hugely prosperous industry, is augmentation itself. When one pays close attention to the performative aspects of camming, one finds that cammers have created for themselves a culture in which camming functions as an interaction with a patriarchal environment which presupposes the disembodiment of sex workers, but in actuality reifies an augmented embodiment through play with the image of the body as both material and symbolic. In other words, what makes cammers successful and what has made the camming industry successful is the fact that cammers play with digital dualism through the manipulation of affective labor and performativity. And for all you Foucault fans out there, for performativities. All right. So cammers are a field of adult entertainers whom, using webcams or similar devices, live stream performances of sexually charged acts before a mostly male, mostly anonymous audience in exchange for money or gifts. These performances are, to varying degrees, carried out in collaboration between performer and audience, with members of the audience posing questions, requests, etc. to the performer, and the performer responding accordingly. What sets cammers apart from other online sex workers is the connection between the live-streamed visual spectrum of their bodies with the affectations they perform. The relationships and interrelationships that take place on cam have an air of authenticity to them, and the sexual exchanges are more real. And to some extent, this is quite true, writes one cammer Tilly, and this is also, I'm using their screen names from Amber Cutie, quote, to one thing that differs, quote, one thing that differs greatly with live streaming of and filming porn is the fact that from day to day and minute to minute, you could do whatever you wish. I try to be myself on cam, and I don't push my boundaries much outside of what I'm normally comfortable doing in my personal life, unquote. Furthermore, this sense of authenticity is mediated wholly upon the introduction of augmentation, in the sense that there is a distinct separation between cammer and customer, which is mediated via computers as well as a technological enhancement of the model's environment, image, and brand. This very phenomena is what makes the camera an intriguing figure in that there is no set way of discursively placing them. Most scholars who have written on camming don't necessarily know where to place camming or the transformation of aspects and performances. Paul Bleakley cannot resist falling back on terminology from traditional pornography, using a then versus now type approach to his discussions. On Amber Cutie forums, one can find numerous posts in which academics and everyday customers alike bumble through conversations about the relationship to sex workers, how they use their bodies, and whether online sex work is empowering or disempowering. Angela Jones perhaps gets closest, if only because she attempts to create a framework for camming while also affirming that camming takes place, quote, within patriarchal systems, unquote. But she still falls short because she sees the act of camming as existing within one side or the other of an opposed states of pleasure and danger, which ultimately translate into empowerment, i.e. control and embodiment, versus disempowerment, i.e. loss of control and disembodiment. From viewing these discussions, one might recognize the influence of Nathan Jurgensen's infamous digital dualism acting upon the researchers and debaters. Digital dualism can be understood to be the normative approach between the relationship between the URL and IRL, which can be defined, to use Jurgensen's words, quote, the habit of viewing the online and offline is largely distinct. The common misunderstanding that experience is zero-sum, unquote. The lure of digital dualism is that disembodiment rules the web, that the body languages in the URL, existing only as a stagnant spectacle. Digital dualism presupposes that the significance of the body holds changes in some way when exposed to and or read through the digital. To the digital dualist, the URL contains only the symbolic likeness of the body, the socio-political implications of a body, and its social positioning without the material presence of one. Ideally, this would mean that all bodies would be seen as somewhat the same online, but in practice, one recognizes that digital dualism posits only the symbolic URL body as the normative body, i.e. white, male, able-bodied, heterosexual, etc. Oh, cool. So when embodied in this light, when examined in this light, one might note that digital dualism is heavily opposed by feminist theory. which recognizes the body as a textual phenomena, as existing on a matrix of different types of given significances. The body is made significant, is given social, cultural, and political relevance through its interrelation with different rhetorics and forms of ideologies. And this way, a body is organized and made significant by nature of the powers it interacts with, a phenomenon known as embodiment. As Donna Haraway writes in her essay, Situated Knowledges, feminist embodiment is not about a fixed location in a reified body, female or otherwise, but about nodes in fields, and responsibility for difference in material semiotic fields of meaning, unquote. Thus, as Zeynep Tufekci argues in her essay, We Were Always Human, quote, the essence of humanity is that we have always been both symbolic and embodied. This by itself can never be interpreted as post-human because there was never a pre in which humans were not simultaneously and inseparably both symbolic and embodied, unquote. This approach centers the online body as an augmented body within an augmented reality when considering the place of the body in the URL, which sets the stage for an examination of how cameras use this particular positionality to their advantage by maintaining a narrative of digital dualism within their performances. So when examining the relationship between the embodied camera, confronting and acting through digital dualism, one might ask the question, what is the thing that links embodied actors online? Perhaps we need to look no further than acts cameras perform, which are themselves symbolically driven recognitions of the customer's personhood, commonly known as affective labor. Affective labor is a form of immaterial labor that works to produce affects, emotional responses, and connections. Cameras perform affective labor when they cater to sexual desires or fantasies. As such, writes Michael Hart, affective labor is itself and directly the constitution of communities and collective subjectivities, unquote. Affective labor is thus highly connected to the processes of embodiment, in that they both rely on socially prescribed bodily codes and languages that are either performed on the body or are symbolically associated with the body, or both simultaneously. The fact that these acts of affectation are performed A, directly on or in relation to the camera's body, and B, physically separate from the customer via augmentation, curates the air of authenticity to the camera's performance. Quote, we attract what we are, unquote, writes user Mojito's Journey. Affective labor is the way in which augmented bodies may reach each other. Affectation becomes a link between embodied subjects on either side of the computer screen. What makes this topic tricky to navigate, then, is the ideology of the adult entertainment industry, which predicates cameras' entire performance on the customer's assumption that the material bodies are made disembodied, i.e. objectified, through the pornographic consumption of the affective labor performed by the affective augmented body. Here, one can see perhaps one of the more insidious and patriarchal workings of digital dualism, and that it curates for the customer the removal of responsibility that comes with interacting with a disembodied object out of the act of recognizing the camera as an embodied subject exchanging their body, not actually happening. Digital dualism presupposes the embodied and the symbolic are separable. And as ACF forum carrier Serenity Tam writes, this approach is, quote, in part that can be because of biases against sexual freedom, and in part it can be because of a societal savior complex that relies on the connotations associated with the body being exchanged. The fact that so many are resistant to seeing sex work as an exchange of service can even contribute beyond a revocation of bodily autonomy, but mentally as well. It literally amounts a sex worker to her body, a body that does not have autonomous thought, unquote. However, this patriarchal reading of the usage of symbols and embodiment in camming ignores the fact that camming is fundamentally rooted in performances, which themselves rely on physical distance and distinctness from customers. Furthermore, these performances are forms of affective labor in themselves. Specifically, this affective labor is positioned to exchange subsequent affects to the audience for capital. I'm just going to skip ahead. In this, the camera, in other words, the affective augmentive body, the camera in this way appears to shift repeatedly between being augmented, embodied, and disembodied, between being a subject performing tasks on their own, their own choosing and a dehumanized object of pornographic consumption. In this way, the camera deliberately upholds both embodied states presupposed by digital dualism, disembodied and material-bodied, as a function of their performance and environment. In other words, cam models play with digital dualism of customers through playing with affectation and performance. They're not only making the act of viewing these encounters from the digital dualist viewpoint of IRL versus URL a confusing experience for customers, but circling back upon and relying on these viewpoints and contradictions as the core facet of the experience. This approach moves beyond the rhetoric of empowerment versus disempowerment, because the crux of the appeal of camming rests on the interrelation between the camera appearing to be embodied and disembodied simultaneously, when in reality, both visions are just another form of augmented embodiment. Thank you all so much.
Hi. I'm Rachel. Let me just set up. Hi everyone, I'm Rachel. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Manchester, but I recently completed my master's at Cambridge, and this was my research project, so I'm here to talk about that. So I'm interested in looking at dating apps. You may have heard of Tinder, Grindr, Bumble. Those are some of the big ones around town. And I'm interested in them because of the fact that they're image-based technologies. And so I'm interested in the consequences of the fact that they're image-based in terms of everyday practices of romance, identity, courtship, and more. So what are dating apps? I argue that they're distinct from online dating in that they are primarily mobile, so they exist only on a smartphone platform. So for example, OkCupid now has an app, but it's also a website, so I don't really consider that a dating app exclusively since there's a dual platform situation. And like I said before, they're primarily image-based, which I think is interesting and fairly novel because most people conceive of online dating as fairly text-heavy, and there's a lot more information you can put on a profile, on an online profile. So I'm interested in the fact that these profiles are image-based and kind of fairly minimal in terms of the content that's available on them. They're also geolocation-based, which I think makes them unique. Back with online dating, there was the idea that there was the romantic idea that you could connect with anyone wherever they were in the world based on who they were in terms of personality, and that location really didn't matter because you could make a connection. And I think dating apps counteract that in that the primary thing driving the connection is the fact that you're physically close to each other in terms of space. They also have a consent to chat feature in some cases, and often they are connected to Facebook. So there are many of them for many different reasons. JSwipe, Blender, Luxy for the rich and successful, apparently. But I'm here to talk today about Tinder. So it's a very saturated market, but Tinder is one of the most popular ones. You probably have heard of them, or heard of it, sorry. So I'm focusing on how people use Tinder primarily in my research, or in this research. Now I'm doing Grindr as my PhD, but that's a different thing. Okay, so this is a typical Tinder profile from their website. You can see it's one image at a time, which is unique, fairly unique and revolutionary at the time. Other dating apps before that tended to have a tiling matrix of multiple profile images at once. And you can swipe left or right to indicate interest or lack of interest. So if you swipe left, it should be right, sorry, whatever. It's a match, and you can see that you've matched with that other person, and then only at that point are you able to have a private chat with them. So my research question is, how do the ways people create and look at dating app profiles contribute to new understandings of image-based communication? And I argue that they structure and perhaps even are the site of the development of a new visual literacy. which I'll go into in a minute to explain why I think it's new. So my methods were a mixed method study of an online sample of 86 and also 6 semi-structured interviews. They were mostly done on people who live in the New York City tri-state area. And they were, even though it was open to all ages, people who responded were 18 to 30, which actually reflects the majority of dating app users. And what I mean by visual literacy is, or a new visual literacy, I guess, is, well, let's take a step back and look historically. Image-based courtship existed before. So back in the medieval times, you know, the prince was like, I'm going to go find myself a nice princess to marry. And they'd send around the royal portrait. And let's say this princess was very nice and she had a pomegranate in her hand. This was a universally understood symbol of fertility, let's say. But it was a symbol that was established by an academic elite, kind of the elite of society. And I think what's different about the image codes that have been established through the use of image-based technology, such as dating apps, is the fact that they're user-driven. They're created by the users themselves, and there's sort of a difference in terms of the politics of that. So I argue that the visual literacy basically means that people have a lot of meaning in terms of how they look at their photos, how they choose their photos, and how they look at other people's photos. And, you know, I made it quite a big argument in this whole work, but I'm cutting it down for this talk just to look at how the narrative of authenticity as opposed to ambiguity exemplifies visual literacy for dating app users. And I think it's interesting, it comes back to romance, or notions of romance, which are tied to authenticity, which I will also go into. So an example of ambiguous image. So Tina, not her real name, said to me, if like some people only have photos of them doing things, but it's always from the back or in the distance, then it's a sign that they've got a bad face and they're hiding it. You are chuckling because you recognize this, which I think is very interesting. So that's an example of an image code that is kind of a red flag for Tina and for many other users. Things like blurry photos, group photos, having a profile of only group photos so you can't tell who the star of the profile is. Things like having photos that were all clearly taken on the same day or only selfies in the same outfit are also red flags. And I argue that this kind of goes back to safety concerns for this generation because of concerns developed through discourses on online dating about catfishing, which is someone who pretends to be someone they're not online. And so these users are very adept at kind of looking for things that indicate this kind of concern over validity of identity. And another reason why Tinder, I think, is very popular is because it has a connection to Facebook. And even though you can make a fake Facebook profile, it's quite difficult. There are a lot of vetting systems, so you need to have a certain number of friends, things like that. So there's the double security feature, the fact that there's a consent to chat and the fact that it's tied to Facebook and the fact that the photos on a dating app profile on Tinder have to come from the Facebook profile as well. So that's another level of censorship. And that, I think, mitigates a lot of concerns about being harassed with like sexually explicit images that are unwanted. So in contradistinction to ambiguous images, there are what users consider to be authentic images. So here is my favorite one. Yes, true response. This user really hated men cuddling puppies in a disingenuous way. So she was able, I don't know how, to determine that it was a disingenuous thing. But I think this speaks to a larger narrative of the fact that people kind of pose for dating app profiles sometimes, and that people are able to determine, they're adept at determining that's not a genuine image, that's not a genuine feeling. So some other things that people talked about were, Milan said, I tried to use images that represented some values that I have. While Sanjay said he chose photos of himself traveling, cooking, and he's on the political side, so he chose photos of himself at demonstrations. And a survey respondent mentioned that they were annoyed by selfies, shirtless photos, only photos of themselves out drinking, because they hoped that they would have more of a personality than just that. And I'm actually surprised at how restrictive some of these interpretations are about images, because lots of people go out drinking and have photos of them going out drinking with their friends. It's a fairly normal thing. But to these users, if that was the type of photo you chose on your profile, that therefore indicated that it was an aspect of your personality. So I think dating apps are considered inherently superficial by popular media generally because they're image-based, and people perceive people choosing matches on Tinder, let's say, based solely on physical attraction, when in fact the way people look at other images and the way people choose images of themselves are ways that kind of express aspects of personality, their values, and in some way their identity. So I used Giddens's notion of romance and intimacy to kind of conceptualize how people looked at authenticity for themselves. And he argued that, well, he had a 2-point argument. I guess I'm summarizing it into 2 points. One is that the self is incomplete and needs another self to be complete. And 2 is that the melding of authentic selves is what generates pure intimacy, and it requires absolute self-disclosure. So I found that in terms of the first idea, the self is incomplete, and you need another self to be complete, that's kind of an older romantic idea, but in practice, I think many users did not relate to that. They felt like their dating app profiles really represented who they were to a great degree. And the melding of authentic selves, the second point that he makes, I think did come through in a lot of the responses I had, because people felt like they wanted to be liked for who they really were. So I think it's very interesting when it comes to ideas about image. People would say, well, people would not want a photo that they felt was too good looking because they felt like they didn't want someone to not like them in person. So they wanted a flattering photo, but not a photo that wasn't them or that was like an unrealistic, unachievable version of them, because they had this older romantic idea that I want to be liked for who I am, and I want them to be physically attracted to me. So like I said, I think it counteracts the idea that dating apps are inherently image-based, and that authenticity is a big part, people putting in aspects of their personality, their hobbies. They felt like that they were really representing themselves in their dating app profiles. But I think, once again, it comes back to the fact that, is it really authentic? They felt like they could detect a real profile because someone should just naturally have lots of photos of themselves doing many different activities, but of course taken by other people, which in fact isn't really true. A lot of the times people will pose for their profile pictures. They'll say, I'm hiking, take a photo of me so I can put it on my Tinder profile, that type of thing. So I think it's kind of a little more nuanced and complex in terms of how authenticity is actually practiced. And also, people did not want too many selfies. A couple selfies generally were okay, but they said, oh, too many selfies say you're narcissistic, etc., which I was surprised by, because I think one could make the argument that a selfie is the ultimate self-expression because you're in control of the image and you're taking it of yourself. So I thought that was kind of interesting. There's a little bit of tension there. And so my conclusion, I hope you enjoy this, is that there is some romance in the Tinder sphere, I guess. And like I said, when I consider romantic practices, I mean sex, hooking up, dating, flirting, I think they're all practices of romance. But I was surprised by how conservative some of the notions of behavior and romance were through the use of Tinder. And I think in some ways it's quite revolutionary in that people can examine the visual in a way that's really user-driven and affects other network technologies that are also image-based, so Facebook, Snapchat, etc. I think the same type of visual literacy is potentially crossing platforms, but it does affect people's real lives and real practices that they use every day when they're waiting in line on Tinder. Thank you. Oh, I had references. Do you want to see that? Sorry. Okay, well, yeah.
Hi, I'm Millie. Sorry, the MTA really outdid itself this weekend in canceling every single subway line that I usually take to get here. So I was late, but my name is Millie. I'm the moderator. Thank you for the panelists, even though I missed half your presentation. So again, apologies for that. I guess I wanted to start before we open it up to questions from the audience and to questions from anybody listening to the live stream. And ask you guys something of a more personal question. The title of this panel is It Me, and so I'm going to ask you guys a little question about each of you. Over the course of your research, I mean, research in general, thinking about something analytically in general, is a way of separating oneself from the topic at hand. And the topic at hand is performance on the internet. I assume that each of you, engage in that. Mitra, I know your research is very much practice-based. You're at the center of that, but we're all, to a certain extent, performing online. And so I'm wondering how developing your research has actually shaped your own practices online, and the ways that it might have changed the way that you present your own self in those spaces. Whoever wants to start.
Want to go first? I go first?
Sure.
Okay. Well, basically, the thing I perceive when I do research on the internet and when I approach to the performative side of doing research over the internet is basically you have to make a political choice. The point is you have to make a political choice about the representation you wish to give, and basically you have to define boundaries. And first of all, I mean, you have to define the boundaries you wish to put, or if you want to put boundary or not about the representation you want to give about yourself. And secondly, is always connected to the political choice, is related to the fact that you have to decide if privacy does exist or doesn't exist anymore. I mean, I think that basically privacy is a pretty modern concept, modern mean related to the modern society, and living in the postmodern era, we may say, probably we have to redefine the boundary of privacy. So again, the political choice is about, is really privacy so important as it was in the so-called modern society, where we had, like, as an example, the notion of time, work, and family separated in pretty defined context, or if we want to use the Ziggy Bauman metaphor of liquidity, privacy doesn't have the classical modern value that it used to have, and basically we live in a melting pot of context, and so in the so-called liquid society where the representation is liquid.
Well, I think boundaries is an interesting thing.
Can you make sure the mic is on? Is it on?
Should I just talk?
Oh,
like,
yeah,
closer?
just for the
I'll
live
get, like,
stream.
real close to this. Hi. So I think it's interesting you talk about boundaries, because there are lots of crossing over in terms of different mobile platforms, but at the same time you have different, I guess, versions of yourself for each platform, which I think are genuine. I guess authenticity comes back to that, versions of yourself. So I think it's interesting because I study technology and I love talking about that stuff, but I can't use it like a normal person. I feel like I can't escape my critical analysis of it, which I've accepted and don't mind, but it's kind of hard in terms of having like a professional presence versus a personal presence on the internet. And I feel like no matter which one I have, my experience of it personally is not, I can't just sit back and enjoy it. You know, it's kind of like when you learn about feminism and then you watch like a movie that is kind of sexist that you used to enjoy. You still enjoy it, but you feel like you can't not see it anymore. It's kind of like that, I think. That's just personal. And also everyone always asks me, oh, are you on Tinder? And that kind of, I'm not on Tinder. Like, you know, people, I feel like people always want to know about the personal interest when you study technology, and they look for you in those spaces. And I feel like if you study them, you can't experience space the same way, which is interesting in terms of boundaries. Yeah.
Is my mic working? Oh, cool. I think this will touch on that. I really would like to think about my project as a attempt at like listening and solidarity with sex workers. I think I'll leave whether I actually achieve that up to y'all. But I think the main thing that I really learned is kind of like the performativity within like academia itself, because you are going to learn a whole lot more about sex workers by browsing a forum in which sex workers talk to each other than like any academic book or article that has ever been published ever about sex work and sex workers. And I guess like in that there's, and I guess kind of the key difference between that is like authenticity and like the place where it's coming from. And that like, I think another thing that I noticed, I talked about this a little bit in my paper, but I found a couple of posts in which like academics would be posting on these discussion forums asking sex cammers or sex workers like, hey, I'm writing a master's thesis about camming, or hey, I'm writing an essay about camming, and I want to interview some people. And the students, the master's students or the writers, the academics who actually said like, I have experience with camming, I have experience with sex work,
were like they got like a lot more like positive responses. Like cameras were a little bit like more interested in speaking with them. Then like academics are kind of just like kicking in the door and being like, hey, I want to see your world. And so like I think so I guess in general like performativity and authenticity on the web is kind of hard to like find and describe, and so I guess kind of the best way to be able to like reach that is to just go right back to the source rather than kind of having to take these like 2 steps beyond of it just for like the sake of that like academic stamp or legitimized stamp.
Yeah, on a personal basis, this is working somehow. Yeah. So as I was mentioning at the beginning, I mean, this research has been built upon some sort of direct experience of context of crises and revolutions, uprisings, especially in the Middle East. And in that context, the idea of disembodiment also take a shape in relation to my personal online visibility. I mean, the fact that by practicing form of gaze embodiment in the streets and recording images and uploading them online, eventually me as much as and more than me, the local protesters were exposed to datification and trackability. Indeed, one of the ways, of course, was that of trying to be as much as invisible as possible, and to do that, of course, and up to these days, I mean, I don't have anything related to my real name online. And I use proxies, and I have, of course, like a piece of tape in front of my webcam of the computer, but yeah. So on a personal level, that's been tricky. For example, when it comes to Tinder and things, I wanted to open an account on Tinder, but then I didn't have any pictures on my Facebook account, so I wasn't really like I couldn't even grant the first
Image
layer
codes.
of security in that
Very
sense.
ambiguous.
Yeah, very ambiguous there, very sketchy profile mine. I don't get laid that much. I mean, on Tinder, unfortunately, but yeah. So, but yeah, I just want to point out then again, this idea of disembodiment in that specific context, it was really a political weapon. So here again, another example of disembodying as a way to escape like datification, rather than being a way to getting datified. Yeah.
Does anybody in the audience have any specific questions or general questions for the panel?
Yeah, my question is for Mitra. So these ideas of gaze disembodiment, I guess when you mentioned POV images, and this might not be within your purview, but when you mentioned POV images, I thought of POV pornography. That might say more about me than about the topic. But I was wondering if kind of the same ideas of embodied and disembodied gaze might apply in different ways to pornography, especially POV pornography. Faye, you might be able to speak to this as well with regard to male versus female bodies in that space.
So the question just for the live stream is whether the concepts that Mitra mentioned about disembodiment also apply to pornography. Sorry, just coordinating it.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in that specific case, we are exposed to this sort of like POV, phallocentric, androcentric, like aesthetic in relation to pornography, which is not very like forward thinking. So I guess maybe your question would be then: is it possible to find way of embodiment within the field of pornography that are politically emancipating the role of like female, for example, or and how to do that? I'm not sure, but about listening to this other conversation, and especially in relation to Faye, and I mean I have in mind this sort of like Chaturbate platform. I don't know if you've been like studying that. I don't know if you're familiar with that, guys. A place where like mainly amateur models, and maybe you can jump on that. Perform sexual acts in front of a crowd of people, which is disembodied because the crowd is just watching, is not visible from the point of view of the model, but everybody, and we're talking maybe about thousands of people watching this single image being screened at them. And what kind of camera? What's the role of the webcam in this specific context? Is that a CCTV kind of gaze? So it is a centralized gaze, or it is instead a sort of like semi-POV, because the camera is in control of the camera and it can decide the way to record herself and so on. So I'm just pointing out how, and also that was important, maybe I wasn't clear enough before, processes of embodiment and processes of disembodiment are not are happening simultaneously, and as soon as there is a form of disembodiment, there is immediately a form of re-embodiment into something else. And it's not possible to break them apart. So I guess it's interesting to look at the circulation of these processes rather than trying to identify them. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, if you can.
I think probably the key difference between things like POV and like camming is whereas in like POV, both the viewer or like the customer or the perv, whatever you want to call them, are from the point of view of being like a voyeur. Because whereas with camming, they are like taking part in an experience, or at least they have the illusion of they're taking part in the experience, in the sense that it's just like, I'm going to forget that I'm literally like paying this person money, because they are actually giving me affectations which for the most part like feel very real and very genuine, and are supposed to feel very real and very genuine. And I think thinking about that in terms of embodiment is that I guess kind of the core piece of my paper is that it kind of troubles this like pull to like objectify cammers, or to like objectify sex workers, in that like it's kind of you're physically distant from them, and they have a lot stronger boundaries to them. Like you can't physically like make them do anything. Like the worst thing you can do is like leave the chat room, unless you're like truly evil and like want to hack them or something, or dox them, which is actually, that's a whole nother conversation we can have. But so because of these boundaries and because of the physical distance, there's kind of, I guess my argument is that there is like a push to re-embody cammers, and then there's also that push to re-embody cammers is in direct contrast and in direct contradiction with the disembodiment and objectification of like the adult entertainment industry or the porn industry. And so I guess it's my central thesis is that like that clash is the thing that keeps people coming, or keeps people coming back, and confuses like viewers and confuses the relationships that viewers have with cammers, when in reality it's just cammers are just taking on like cool robot bodies for a little bit, I guess. I guess that's the way you can kind of say it. But I guess, and the thing to really center on is that this is very deliberate on the camera's part. Is that like they are doing this on purpose. Like the cameras are so cool. I guess I should really put that forward. Is that like they are literally kind of confusing the boundaries of their own bodies to draw people in and like actually make money off of that. And so I don't necessarily know how that works with your thesis. I think either our theses are friends or they're kind of like bouncing off one another here in this particular angle.
Actually, I want to know if Faye, you can quickly speak about this. Or no, sorry, not Faye. I'm wondering if you could, sorry, Rachel, right? No. Yeah, yes, sorry. Okay, if you could just speak on this in terms of Tinder, and whether you at all notice people, or if the question of actually meeting the people that they're looking at came up in your research.
Can you be more specific?
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of like thinking about embodiment and disembodiment and looking, and the power that you can have when you're presenting yourself through an image or through a screen, as a camera might, the power that you have in controlling that image. Did you notice, did people talk at all about like the actual physical meeting after?
They did. I asked people about a range of things, including their motivations for being on the app, and also whether or not they met people in person, or how long the chats went on, who spoke first, etc. Especially in a heterosexual context, I think there are gender dimensions to the interaction. I was surprised by how few people did end up meeting people in person. I think generally online dating companies and dating apps have issues where people match or indicate interest in each other, but then they don't actually even start a chat conversation, let alone meet in person. So I would say like the average people met maybe one or two people after being on Tinder for maybe 6 months to a year. Really, it was very few people did end up meeting up. I don't think it had to do with consequences of any kind of like distance between their physical body and their virtual body, or like changing their body into an image, kind of like disembodying themselves by having images. But I did notice that a lot of people said that Tinder or dating apps generally improved their self-esteem, but there were no people saying, oh, my self-esteem has gone down because people did not indicate enough interest. I think the fact that there's the match feature attracts people because the threshold of rejection is very low, so they wouldn't really know if someone didn't like them generally. But they did receive positive information, so if they would get their matches. And so for a lot of people who maybe weren't interested in meeting anyone up in person, but just interested in looking, or they were just interested in the ego boost that they got from people appreciating their image or their profile or themselves, to them it was kind of tied together, which I think is very interesting.
Does anybody else in the audience have a question they'd like to pose to our panel?
Can I maybe just jump over this because that was interesting. Yeah, I mean, the role of cameras and in relation to embodiment, disembodiment, especially in relation to subjectivity and what you say, yeah, the cameras are cool and yeah, why not? I mean, there's some coolness happening there, but the coolness to me is related to like processes of creativity in regards to expression of sexuality, and how also this sexuality is open to gender variety and so on and so forth. At the same time, what really scares me in that platform especially is the presence of I mean, is how quickly monetized is the body of the model, to the point that there are and now we get a bit technical, but there's vibrators. It's called Omnibot. There's vibrators that vibrate. There's like all the system is based on tipping. So viewer tips the model, and the model do performance and do actions for them. It can be really mathematic. I mean, every single actions, every piece of clothes falling down has to be reached by a number of tips, and to the point that these vibrators actually vibrate into the sounds of the tip, because when you tip, there is the computer makes a sound. So you have to imagine like a single like woman standing in front of a webcam alone in her apartment, wherever in Venezuela or in Beijing, and then a crowd of 3,000 people tipping, and she's dressing this vibrator, and this vibrator is vibrating. And she's it's an exorcist kind of scene set up. And now the fact that there is really no gap between a physical sensation and the transformation of this physical sensation into money making, that's the scary part in this process of datafying the body. I mean, and the fact that the eroticism of that is also that she's not in control of this. At the same time, she's immediately associating orgasmic pleasure to money making, which I'm not sure is really like a straightforward good thing. And yeah, so it all goes down, and I finish with that just to the point of agencies. I mean, because also you say, okay, these people decide to do that, but then if you see the geography of Chaturbate, then you have a lot of some of the best comers are from Latin America, some very poor countries, and people like, and that's also an interesting debate. So these people, would they end up like prostituting themselves on offline in the streets of Caracas, and indeed is it better that they do that online? And I want to close here. I mean, if you want to see this process in the bigger context, I mean, the sad part of it, beside the really huge creativity involved in that, is that it's part of a same sort of Uberization of the body, which is the same process that happened with the cars, that happened with the housing. We cannot afford housing anymore. We rent off our extra rooms, and we cannot afford car. We rent Ubers or Lyft, and now we can't even afford our own body. Apparently, we're supposed to rent it online and try to transform it into a money-making machine, and I think that's a bit scary. I mean.
Thank you, panelists, for participating. Thank you to all the people who are in this room and who are live streaming. If you have any other questions, feel free to come up afterwards, or to ask on Twitter for those of us who do have Twitter. Thank you.